we have lots of people with 6 and 7 figure deposits in Abra, we also have people in the bottom of the pyramid countries putting $4, $5, $6 in Abra in a single app. And I say ironically, because it was really the developing markets that pushed me to do this in the first place. And in the meantime, we've got every single aspect of the income pyramid or component of the income pyramid using this one single app. I don't know if there's any other app in the world, banking or otherwise, maybe WhatsApp, that has that gamut of income and kind of user profiles that we do now.
So your vision really is, in the end, is to bring a bank into that for everybody.
Yes.
So anybody who has a phone, you have a bank.
Yes, that's right. And I think crypto is the future of banking. And at this point, I don't see how I just don't see a scenario where that's not true. I really don't see how cryptocurrencies aren't at the center of banking in the future. Now it's on the edge, but I think it's moving towards the center and it will take over.
So when you go back and speak to your old mates from Goldman, as we all do they get it now? And how do they perceive it?
Yeah, they get the digital gold store of value story. For sure. It's hard, partially because you can't argue with $1 trillion market cap, and nobody thinks Bitcoin is going to zero now. I think there's myriad discussions around, where does it really fit in? Is it a fad? Is there going to be better technology? But nobody thinks that's going away, right? As a matter of fact, I did have dinner with a colleague who's on the management committee, and we had this exact same discussion. And then the second part of the discussion was, well, where is DeFi going? What does DeFi mean? Is it really going to work? Can it scale? And so that's probably similar to discussions I was having 5 years ago about Bitcoin, right? Will Bitcoin even work? That was the narrative 5 years ago. Does this work? Right? Is it just for drugs? Is it just for the dark web? And now we're having analogous discussions about DeFi. Will it scale? Is it legal? What happens when these contracts are hacked? Et cetera, et cetera. All good questions, all valid questions, but we haven't evolved yet to the narrative or the equivalent narrative for Bitcoin. But I think it's going to happen even faster with DeFi and all these kind of decentralized apps that are going to come down the pipe, whether they're on Ethereum or Cardano, faster than what happened with Bitcoin.
Yeah, I mean, when I look at this space and you look at the rapid pace of innovation going on in DeFi, and then you see that the central banks have figured this out and are now having to bring out the central bank digital currencies, I don't see what role there is for the average money center bank in middle America or middle Europe.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, I think banks have a big problem, right? When the bond markets are not looking good, there's a hunt for yield, and you're certainly not going to find it at your community bank. Their value proposition, their value add is, look at it in the context of the internet itself. The only reason why you couldn't basically allow the internet to eat banking from the inside out, like it did with every other industry, is regulation. And the fact that governments print the money and they also decide who gets to distribute the money via the banks. And if that changes, there's no reason for them to exist, at least not in the form that they do. And that's a real problem. I mean, if you're in banking, for everyone, I don't think anyone else is going to care, because I think over a 25-year period, what's going to happen is that banks will become crypto-centric, and it'll just seem logical by the time it's done. And it'll be like, who talks about Kodak now, or who talks about Blockbuster? And they were a central part of our lives, 25 years ago, and it's just logical that they don't exist anymore now. And I think that's what's going to happen to traditional banks. I just don't see the value proposition going forward.
But if their moat was regulation, then what is happening there? Because this is the big problem with DeFi. It's still kind of, nobody knows where regulation falls on this. How do you think it's going to play out? Because it's, because there's kind of centralized DeFi, and then there's truly decentralized DeFi, which is almost impossible to control. I think the regulators are so far behind.
Oh, totally. So think about it, right? The definition of a decentralized system, at least to me, is there's no off switch. So once there's no off switch, and the two best examples of that I know of are BitTorrent, which was probably the first, besides the internet itself, but BitTorrent, and the second being Bitcoin. You can't shut off either. I would posit there's no way to shut off either of those services today. And I think Ethereum is close, and I think it can get there, but not quite yet. But I think it's moving in that direction, even with proof of stake. And a lot of people are like, oh, it's not decentralized, blah, blah, blah. So these DeFi services aren't quite D yet. Shut off Amazon Web Services and you'll see what I mean. But I think in 3 or 4 years, there will be no more off switch. And at that point, to your question, what role does a regulator play if you can't shut something off anyway? Because there's nobody to go to and say, you're doing it wrong, you're not following the rules, shut it off. Right. The analogy I like with BitTorrent was they couldn't shut BitTorrent off. So the music industry started going after individual named users based upon IP addresses, with these RIA lawsuits. And they realized what a great idea that was after a few months and stopped doing it. Right. After everybody started hating the music industry. Right. So I just don't see, regulators starting to sue or go after individual users of these services. And at that point, there's nothing they can do.
The only point of fragility that I keep trying to think through the fragilities as we get to that end state. The only point of fragility is your ability to interact with the existing banking system.
That's right. 100%.
So if you want to bring money back into the US because you want to buy a house, car, pay your taxes or whatever, they still own that.
Yeah.
And that can make it very awkward still. They can just say,
totally.
Well, if you've come out of these protocols or wherever it is, you can't bring it back in.
Yeah, and that's what they're doing. Like if you look at what's happening in India, the discussions in Nigeria, it's about the on-ramps and off-ramps. Even China doesn't say, hey, we're not going to allow you to store ones and zeros in your pocket, which is like saying, banning Bitcoin, right? They're going to say, we're going to basically regulate the on-ramps and off-ramps and prevent you from transacting. And we're going to prevent third parties from acting as trusted third parties that hold your crypto. That's the best they can do, right? And so it's going to be those on-ramps and off-ramps that are basically going to be the choke point for a lot of this innovation going forward. And some will get it and become centers of innovation. Some will put roadblocks in the way. Like I think India has 180 degrees the opposite perspective on this. They could become a mecca of innovation for banking and crypto if they would just do a 180 on their ridiculous perspective on continually banning crypto and then having the Supreme Court overturn what they're doing. Why somebody doesn't get held in contempt for trying to do the same thing over and over again, I don't know. But put that aside, I really do think they have it completely wrong.
Yeah, because India's actually digitized pretty rapidly.
Yes.
They built this layer on with the open APIs to their UPI payment system and the India stack, and they've got something really powerful.
Right. I mean, I would look the countries that should be like, I kind of look at it like, how do we leapfrog the West? Right. I mean, go look at the train systems in countries that leapfrogged us, right? Because they built their trains in the 90s, right? Well, what about banking? Why isn't Indonesia or India basically saying, let's move our economy to this model over 20 years? And if they came out and said that, I think people would move there to work on this. And as opposed to the opposite, which is people leaving to go work, less so in the pandemic, but euphemistically speaking, moving to work on these projects that are based in other countries. And I think this is a huge opportunity to reverse that trend.
What about the trend that came out, Mnuchin's last famous thing of trying to push through the regulation of KYC on wallets and holdings? How do you think that plays out?
I think that was very misguided. And I think my understanding is even a lot of people at FinCEN, which is the regulatory body within Treasury that deals with that, probably considered that misguided based upon the hearsay from my network. And I think it was a feeble kind of last minute attempt in the last administration to exert control over something that is basically uncontrollable. I mean, look, the Supreme Court has opined on software and software's role as free speech. And I think the way we think about CIP, customer identification processes in banking as it relates to the Bank Secrecy Act is completely out of whack. Nobody challenges it because nobody wants to be the one that everybody's afraid, right? To take this to court. But I just don't see how the extreme that we do in banking is actually legal in this country, but everybody's afraid to fight it. I'm not going to spend our investors' money fighting it. I'm just going to follow the rules because I don't know what else to do. Right. And our customers accept it because they have to do it with every other service they use. I think that there's going to be more attempts at this. I do worry a little bit about the new administration, but I think ultimately they're going to lose. And I think, you see it like with Miami, right? You've heard about like the mayor of Miami. You see it in what's happening in Wyoming, a little bit in Texas. There are pockets of people that get it. and eventually it's going to spread. Right. And I don't think when I say it's going to spread, I mean this understanding that you can't stop it, that we should embrace it, and that it has value is going to spread like wildfire. Right?
Yeah, I totally agree.